Some people without brains do an awful lot of talking, don't they? Scarecrow from The Wizard of Oz. All right. Welcome to another morning episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. For tuning in live, I want to especially thank you for giving me your time so early. Now, the first question you might have is DL, where in the heck have you been? It was a whole week, actually longer than a week. Where were you? Well, as it turns out, I took a week off because podcasting is not my primary job. My W 2, things got a little bit heavy for me. And so, in order to ensure that I could keep up, I said, going to have to put podcasting aside for this week while I got a heavy workload and focus on work because you focus on where you get paid. So, that's what happened, plain and simple. Just wanted to make sure that I could keep up with my obligations for which people are paying me. And I did. And things are, calming down a little bit. There's still work. Don't get me wrong. It just happened to be a little bit heavy. And I wanted to make sure that I wasn't stressing myself too much because, like if podcasting were paying me, then I would have to figure something else out. But in the meantime, since it's more along the lines of a hobby, unfortunately, that means there will be times where I'm just simply not doing a show. And I would love to find a way to communicate this information to you. So who knows? Maybe I'll figure out something. Maybe I can just throw a small video out and say, hey, folks, here's what's going on. And that way, what's going on. And it's not just like this weird out of nowhere, man, where is he? It's 7 o'clock or 7:15 or 7:30, as I sometimes get a little bit on the later side. So anyway, that I just wanted to let you guys know that's what happened. And we're back and we're going to be talking about men and bears and women. So what is that about? Well, have you seen the various videos going around? And I assume that you have, but maybe you haven't. Maybe you're not familiar with this. What's been going on is I don't know where it started. I just started seeing it pop up on Twitter, and then all of a sudden I would see it pop up even more and then more and more, and then it was like everybody was talking about this question. So what happened? Somebody went around and were asking women, would you rather be would you rather be alone in the forest with a man or a bear? And apparently a lot of women would say bear. Now the idea behind it is that bears are predictable, men are not, and this question is supposed to be commentary in a sense on domestic violence and how women feel about men. And it seems like it's kind of engaged in the same old battle of the sexes conversation because men were just like, hey, you know what? That doesn't make any sense. Like, why would you want to hang out with the bear? Why would you want to be alone with the bear? Bear could, tear you up, whereas a man wouldn't necessarily tear you up. And then women were like, hey, you don't understand our fear that we have of men. Like, we can't even walk down the street without men sometimes whistling at us and maybe saying inappropriate things and making us feel uncomfortable. So, I mean, like, so it was very much this battle of the sexes question. So I'm going to talk about it. Now, of course, as a man, I do fall on the side of, hey, this is an absurd question, but I think there's a broader conversation to be had here. And so we are going to have it. So let me play a video here, and this will kind of give you an idea of where people are coming from who fall on the side of, well, I would choose a bear. And then I'm going to respond to that. And then we're going to get into exactly what it is that we might want to start thinking about in terms of a broader conversation. So let's play that video and we will talk about it from there.
Would you rather be stuck in a forest with a man or a bear?
How many people are struck by lightning every year in the United States?
According to National Weather Service, lightning kills about 20 people each year in the United States and hundreds more are injured.
How many bear attacks are there in the United States every year?
According to Bear Vault, since 1784 there have 66 fatal human-bear conflicts by wild black bears. Less than a dozen non-fatal conflicts happen each year, and the vast majority of encounters end with zero bodily contact.
How many women are assaulted in the United States every year?
According to RAIN, on average, there are 463,634 victims, age 12 or older, of rape and sexual assault each year in the United States.
How many women are assaulted by a partner every year in the United States?
According to National Organization for Women, according to the National Center for Injury Prevention and Control, women experience about 4.8 million intimate partner-related physical assaults and rapes every year. Less than 20% of battered women sought medical treatment following an injury.
Okay, man, if you still claim that you don't get this argument, you are the problem. I don't even think that you're human.
All right. So it's a bit of absurd ending there where he says, I don't even think you're human. But just focus on the fact that he says, if you don't understand, this, you are part of the problem. And what he's saying is he's not saying you are part of the problem because you're one of those kind of guys. What he's saying is you are contributing to this by not improving the situation for women. Now, I disagree with this. And I kind of I gave a long spiel on Twitter in response to this video because the video was titled, "If this doesn't put in perspective, nothing will." So here is what I said. I said, this argument hurts women. Number one, women have many thousands of interactions with men every day, every week, every month, every year. This is important because, number two, the National Park Service actively tells everyone to avoid all bear encounters, and they provide avoidance and encounter tips. That's because, number three, every bear is a potential threat to any person. The same cannot be said of men. And unlike men, the more interactions that any person has with a bear, the more they increase their risk. For instance, number four, Timothy Treadwell was an avid bear enthusiast and environmentalist who lived among bears for 13 summers. And he and his girlfriend were mauled and eaten by a bear in 2003. That said, number five, these numbers are far too high. Just one instance of abuse is one too many. All this hurts women because, number six, comparing domestic violence to bear encounters does nothing to improve a woman's safety or help them seek out and associate with men who are not abusers. But it does, number seven, take a real cause for concern with some men and extrapolate it to all men. Also, number eight, it may lead people to believe bears are less dangerous than they actually are. The best thing we can do for women is to promote gun ownership, self-defense courses, and how to identify and avoid potential abusers. Because 77% of women who are abused by a partner were previously abused by that partner. Contrived comparisons to bears only serves to promote ignorance how statistics work. So the whole video here that this guy, when he's asking these questions and they're comparing, and you heard that it was like 66 bear attacks or 60 of all the bear attacks ever, only I think 66 deaths occurred. Like that's how many they have. But again, if you go back to point two, where I said the national, because you can go to the National Park Service website and they have pages that are dedicated to avoiding bears, tips, what to do if you encounter a bear, because a bear is always a potential threat, always. But men are not necessarily the same. So that was my initial point. Okay. And I waded into it in the same way that many men did, looking at it from a very statistical perspective and saying, well, I get it. One abuse is one too many. I get it. Maybe on its surface, the comparison might say, well, yeah, I'd rather be with the bear because, like, when was the last time somebody heard about a bear attack? How often do you hear that? Now, a while back, I pointed out the TikTok, what you might call the TikTok phenomenon. And that's where you're scrolling through the TikTok feed. I'm sorry, TikTok. I meant to say libs of TikTok phenomena. So imagine that you're scrolling through the libs of TikTok account. And if you don't know the account, most people do, but if you don't know the account, they post a lot of what you might call the woke type transgender folk. I mean, they do some more than that, but they do a lot. You'll find a lot of videos of trans teachers celebrating how their kindergarten class is calling them they them, stuff like that. And if you scroll through libs of TikTok enough in a day, you might walk away thinking that every teacher that your child might encounter is a lunatic. And when I say lunatic, I mean the kind of person who feels that they need to get on social media and make videos celebrating they them, but virtually nothing else. And this is something that I pointed out in the past. I've said, well, we're not seeing videos of teachers getting on there and saying, man, when I saw my student who was previously struggling to read finally figure out their phonics, it was just a joy to me. We don't see these kind of videos that are celebrating education. We're only seeing videos of of people celebrating their personal identity being confirmed by their students. That's what we're seeing. And so when you watch enough videos like that, you start to believe that, man, it seems like there's an awful lot of teachers out there that are like this. Like, maybe it's all of them. Maybe it's the teacher that, do I need to go and have a conversation with my child's teacher? And why aren't they celebrating educational milestones? Well, I think what's happening is this is what gets posted, this is what we see, and that becomes our frame of reference, right? This is our frame of reference now. But the reality is, there are thousands upon thousands of teachers who get excited when a student learns how to read or gets past, a difficult math problem that they've been struggling with, right? Or something else, educational speaking. There are thousands of teachers like this, and they're just not making videos. And there are actually probably only a small handful of teachers that seem to be focusing on their personal identity more than a child's educational milestones. And so I think it's a bit deceiving, right? Like this is what's happening with the bear phenomenon, I believe, in that it's nobody really hears about a bear attack. So maybe it's not, maybe it's not, it's not in our mind. We're not primed to think about a bear attack being as dangerous as it really is. And that's why I pointed out about Timothy Treadwell. And it's the first thing that came to my mind. And I remember years ago hearing about this, and there was some audio that came out. So supposedly what happened, Timothy Treadwell was a bear enthusiast. He was an environmentalist, and he would go out and he would live like within really close proximity of the bears. He would camp out and he would videotape them and he would study them. And, like he knew the bears, if you will, like he would name them, I think. And so he would recognize, that bear's, Sue, and that bear's Phil, or whatever, whatever names he might have given him, or and what have you. And then there was one fateful summer where he and his girlfriend were out, and the circumstances ended up that a bear attacked them while they were in their tent. And there is actually audio. I don't know if the audio has actually ever been released, but there was audio that came out in 2003, and I remember hearing it. And even if it was fake, it was horrifying because, like, at no point would a real bear attack be anything other than horrifying. But both of them were killed and eaten by a bear. And so it's a very horrible story. And so that was the first thing that went to my mind. I was like, well, like I don't know how many, at the time, I didn't know how many bear attacks actually happened, let alone how many fatal bear attacks. But my mind immediately went to Timothy Treadwell. And I was like, man, I remember that guy. Like if there was somebody that understood the danger of bears, and if there was somebody that understood what you do and don't do in a bear encounter, I would assume that it would be Timothy Treadwell. My assumption. Now, you never know. Some people do get a little bit brave, more brave than they should be, and they lose their minds and they become foolish. Maybe that was him. I don't know. Now, but I assume that he knew how to behave himself within such close proximity. And he didn't make it. Given enough experiences with bears, you won't make it. But more to the point, does this question really help women? Well, I don't think so. Because at the end of the day, what has become of the question? The question has just been another battle of the sexes. That's it. Men say this, women say this. And guess what? After all the debate, after all the argument, men don't get it. Well, it turns out women are no safer. They're no safer from abusers, real abusers. So therefore, whatever you think of the question, it didn't help. That's the end result. It did nothing to help. It might have further put a chasm between men and women. Men think that women are absurd because they're not thinking statistically and being mindful of the math. And then women are like, well, hey, why aren't these guys trying to at least understand where we're coming from? Why don't they recognize why I would even say that? Now, the other thing is, I'm not actually sure that women really mean it. I know some women will say, yeah, I totally mean it. But let's think about this for a minute. How often, if you're a man, how often has a woman in your life called you to come deal with a snake or a spider? Right. And if you're a woman, think about all the times that maybe you have called a man in your life or a snake or a spider or some woman that that's called. Like this happens all the time. So I'm not even inclined to believe that women really believe this. They're just answering kind of off the cuff and it's a very hypothetical situation, which is why I don't think that it actually would be very beneficial, because there is a problem to address here. And because those statistics, we should be horrified at those statistics. Maybe not the bear one. The bear one seems, like 66. Okay. I mean, if we're going to have a statistic for fatal bear encounters, 66, I guess it's not so bad, right? Like ever. Okay, fine. But the rest of the statistics, the rest of them, we should be horrified and we should want to do something about it. Regardless of the bear question, we should want to resolve this issue and say, how do we make this better for women? Right. And this is why I ended with saying, well, I think that the best thing that we can do is to promote gun ownership, because at the end of the day, and look, people don't like talking like this, and I don't either. I don't really like violence, but I'm not afraid of it. Okay. But at the end of the day, if a man is going to abuse a woman, she should be armed, because one of two outcomes: either the man knows she's armed and will no longer abuse her, go on about his way, or he tries to abuse her and she takes him out. Period. End of story. If you're going to abuse a woman, or any person for that matter, but we are specifically talking today about abuse with women. So let's focus on that. And if you are a man, you want to abuse women in any way, right? I mean physically. I don't mean like cat calling. I mean, that's not appropriate, but that's also not I wouldn't advocate responding with a firearm for that. But if you were going to physically threaten a woman, then she should absolutely have the right to carry and to defend herself lethally if necessary. And that, I believe, is the best protection that we can provide women. Now, Where does this conversation take a little bit of a turn? Well, as it turns out, I discovered something very interesting last night when I posted a meme about this. So again, everybody's talking about this man bear thing, right? And I've seen some memes and some of them are kind of funny and I posted one on Facebook. Now I don't typically get on Facebook and post a whole lot of political stuff. I generally keep that to Twitter where my following there is pretty much entirely political, and then my following on Facebook is a mixture of like family and friends and some political. So I try to keep it a little bit balanced over on Facebook. And I don't generally get on Facebook. One, I don't get on Facebook because, like, let's be honest, the app isn't all that impressive. It was kind of cool back in like, I don't know, 2003. And now it's like, it's just like not whatever. We don't have to go into all the details, but you get it. You know, Facebook's not cool anymore. But I get on there sometimes and I show this meme. Let me pull this picture up here. And what do we got here? So this is a four-part meme where in the first one, and if you're watching, you can see it and you can hopefully read the text. If you're listening, I will describe it for you so that you understand. It's a meme that has four parts to it. And the first one, it shows a woman. It says, "We don't trust men, so we choose the bear." And then the second one, it's got kind of like, it looks like a college age kind of guy. And he says, "So you understand why I don't want a man in the bathroom with my daughter." And then the next picture, it shows the woman like she's kind of like just got this the same look on her face as in the first, in the first, I'm trying to think of what term that I want to use here, but in the first part, and then in the fourth part, it shows kind of her eyebrows are her furrowed. Is that the word I'm looking for? Basically a turn in her eyebrows to express anger, and and it's kind of like the idea of the meme is that he's pointing out some obvious point that she didn't think about, and it made her angry to have to to um to consider that particular point. And when I posted it to Facebook, I said plot twist dot dot dot. That's it. That's all I said about it, right? I just said plot twist. And in my mind, the plot twist here was not, I wasn't really wading into the trans issue. The plot twist here was, if you are going to make the argument that men can't be trusted and you want people to hear you out on that argument, well, that's the argument that many people have made when it comes to the trans bathroom issue. So therefore, you have to come face to face with the notion that if men, and when I say men, we're going to use a catch-all term here because I know we're talking about the trans community. So let's think of it more in terms of male. So if you think that adult males are dangerous, then you have to face the fact that many people see adult males, trans or not, as equally dangerous. Now this is we're not talking about statistics at this point. Okay. We're just simply saying, oh, in your mind, adult males are dangerous. Well, guess what? In the minds of many people, adult males in this context are also dangerous. Well, that I got a response that I wasn't expecting from a friend of mine who said, "Man, I can't believe that you're wading into this. You're kind of pushing this, trans people are dangerous, trans women are dangerous in the bathroom, um, uh, stereotype, right?" And I said, "Well, I'm really not actually." And so then I went through and I was doing my explain. So let me explain where this meme has taken me now. Because initially I just posted the meme only to say, if that's your belief, well, that's the belief over here. And now we need to have some reconciliation conversation because, okay, you believe adult males are dangerous or there's a threat to be concerned about. Well, so do other people. And is yours any less than theirs? And we have to have this conversation. But then something started dawning on me. I was like, well, wait a minute here, because I wasn't really wading into the trans debate. And when it comes to trans folk, look, I'm going to put it out there. I don't generally care so long as we keep it with adults. Okay. Now, when we talk about like drag shows and these kind of things, I think they're inappropriate. And I've said so before, and I will stand behind my words that I think they're inappropriate. I don't believe that having legislation that prevents adults from taking their children to a drag show is necessary. I stand behind that as well. I think that there are better ways to handle this socially. Now, I will support a law that says a child cannot be a drag performer. I think that's very inappropriate because I don't believe that a child can consent to having their body, their persona viewed by adults in a particular way, however that way is. I don't believe that they can consent to that. So I would accept a law for that. But again, I'm not really trying to wade into the trans debate here. All I was simply trying to say is this view is shared by others in a different context. And then it dawned on me, maybe the issue here is that we have a negative view of men, or you might call males. So I want you to think about something. When I was growing up, I'm 45, when I was growing up, if I was watching a movie, I would see the hero as a man, Rocky, um, Rambo, Sylvester Stallone. I'm sorry, not so. Chuck Norris, Bruce Lee, all these guys, right? Like there was all these heroes, like they did these great things, and that was in the movies. But then when I watched television, well, I got a different view of men. So I remember growing up watching reruns of like Archie Bunker, or watching um, All in the Family, or all those shows back in the '90s, and was it Tim the Toolman Taylor? All these shows, and they all showed men as kind of less, but family men, everyday men, right? We knew that Rocky and Rambo and Bruce Lee and all this, we knew that these guys were kind of like the exceptions. But then we watched these family shows, and the family shows with everyday average guy, dad, who goes to work. Maybe he works as a lawyer, maybe he works as a policeman, he works at the factory, whatever. He's a guy that could be our dad. And these guys were painted as kind of bigoted and irrational, dumb, aloof. They didn't get it, and we laughed at him and it was funny. But maybe that's actually contributed negatively to our society a lot more than we realize. Because I don't recall ever watching a show where and I'm talking about television shows, where the dad was presented in a same somewhat heroic light that I remember watching movies. It was like they were entirely different people. Okay. There wasn't the family where the dad was really well respected by everybody. And when he said something, it was profound and, or whatever, right? It was like he might have gotten there at the end of the show. By the end of the show, like I remember like Tim the Toolman Taylor would finally get it toward the end of the show sometimes, right? He would go and talk to his neighbor Wilson. And Wilson would be the guy that would give him, all the insight. And then he'd be like, yeah, that makes sense. And then he would finally get it, right, from this guy that we never really saw in full. So the main character was a dummy, right? He was kind of this aloof guy. He was a nice guy, but he was the guy that kind of had to work it out. He had to figure out what was going on by somebody else's help, with someone else's help. And so you scroll forward to today, and we're having this conversation about men and bears. So a lot of women look at it and they say, well, I wouldn't trust I would trust a bear more than a man. I don't think they really would, but let's just go with what they said. And then we also have these people who say, well, you've got these trans women. For the people that maybe don't know what that term is, that is a person who is born biologically as a man or a male, and they transitioned to a female. trans woman. Okay. Trans, like, transition to a woman. Think of it that way. And we have a lot of people that express concern and say, well, I don't want my daughter going into the bathroom with a man, right? They have that same concern. And I'm not diminishing, I'm not diminishing their concern. I'm just simply, let's state where they are. So let's talk about some other things where it seems like males in our society have a bad reputation. You ever heard somebody say, well, it's usually men that say this, who have a daughter. Well, when my daughter's date comes to pick her up for prom, I'm going to have my gun in my hand just so he can see and he knows. It's very common. Happens. It still happens, by the way. Like, it was only like a year or two ago that I saw pictures on social media floating around of, men taking a photo with a gun in hand with their daughter and their daughter's date getting ready to go to prom, and they'd make some sort of snarky comment about, like, I let the boy know, he better take care of my daughter, and ultimately what you're doing is you're threatening a boy, but you're threatening a boy because you believe that this boy, this male, is a threat. Now I take exception to this, and I've come out and I've said, like, look, any man that threatens my son for trying to take his daughter to the prom is going to have to answer to me. Okay. I probably should make myself a little bit bigger to make, like, I better start lifting out, working out, lifting weights. Right. But otherwise they'll probably just laugh at me too. But the point being, I abhor this. I think it's a horrible thing to do. But then, I started thinking about it and I was like, man, think of all the ways where men or males are considered a threat. So we've got, women consider them, on some level, males to be a threat, right? They would rather choose a bear. We've got our dads who are super protective of their daughters, threatening boys with the shotgun or, a firearm. And we've seen this. I mean, I've seen it in the movies. We've seen people take pictures of it. Like, this is a common trope. And it's not only just a trope, but it's actually one that plays out in real life. And then we have this trans issue where, men are like, hey, if a man walks in on my daughter, he's, I'm going to be, I'm going to do this thing. Right. And so I was like, oh my goodness, there is this common thread. And the common thread here is that we view males as predators. So let me tell you something else. There was a movie a long time ago called Mozart and the Whale. And it was about I think it was Mozart and the Whale, or maybe it was Adam. There was two different, I think it was Adam. I think the movie title was Adam, actually, but it's one of the two movies. I can't remember exactly which one. Both of them are about a young man who's like in his early 20s or something like that. And he has Asperger's, right? Like a high functioning form of autism. And in whichever movie it was, the young man, I think he gets fired from his job for being he's so attentive to details that it actually interferes with his job, and he ends up getting fired from his job. So he's walking home and he's really sad and sullen, and he's passing by a park, and he starts watching the kids play, and he just kind of, like, a little smile lights up on his face. Now, in the movie, when you're watching it, it's very clear that this isn't a creepy moment. Now, if I'm describing it to you, it might sound creepy to you, and we'll address that in just a moment. But in this film, he's not being creepy. He's just simply watching kids play, and a smile comes to his face. Well, then a couple police officers notice him, and he's on the other side of a fence, right? So, like, there's a fence, and then there's some distance, and then the kids are playing, and he's on the other side of the fence, and he's just casually watching kids. The officers come up, and they're like, hey, what are you doing? Well, the kid's socially awkward. So he's just kind of like, look, I'm just watching the kids play. And they're like, oh, you weirdo. And so they start kind of harassing him a little bit, and he ends up getting arrested. And then a friend has to come and bail him out or whatnot. And at no point was he doing anything wrong. So I point this out in the thread. I was like, I am a dad. And if I don't have my son with me that I can point out at a park and I'm sitting there and I'm watching kids play. If somebody's like, "Oh, hey, which one's yours?" And I say, "Well, my kid's not here." Or maybe I said, "I don't have a kid. I'm just, I'm just sitting here enjoying the fresh air, enjoying the birds, and, just enjoying kids play." Everybody's going to be like, "Whoa, whoa, wait a minute. What? Why are you here watching kids?" Right? As a man, I do not have that opportunity to go and watch in any way, shape, or form. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether it's, oh, wait, we obviously don't want him in a creepy way, but let's say that I'm not being creepy. Let's say that I just, maybe I'm a principal of a school, and, maybe I'm just sitting there just enjoying and just kind of like people watching, but kid watching, which really sounds kind of creepy. But think about it. Why does it sound creepy? Are most men actually threats, or are they not? Are males threats, or are they not? We have to decide. And so when I posted this photo, this graphic, the meme, that was kind of what I was saying. I was like, look, we need to start coming to terms. But I didn't really think about it in full until the conversation started going. Until my friends started saying, "Hey, like, I hope you're not getting in on this, all trans women are predators." And I'm just like, and I said very clearly, I said, "No, I'm not. In fact, I would argue that most trans women are not threats." And when I say most, to the point where the threats are almost zero. It's never zero. There's somebody out there who is a weirdo and they are a threat. And maybe they're a trans person and maybe not. But if you think about it, we as a society view males and females differently. But I'm not convinced that we're doing a good job of it. Now, I get it. And I've made this point to people before. I'm 5'3" and I weigh 120 pounds. I can overpower most women that I know. Not that I would, but I'm just saying on a physical level, I could physically overpower most women that I know. Even women that are large that are larger than me. Many of them I could still physically overpower. Now, not all of them. And like, I get it. We're speaking in generalities here. And I have a friend who is smaller than me, and I'm pretty sure she could knock me for a loop if it came down to it. Okay. So I get it. These are generalities that we're talking about. But I think we've allowed ourselves to take these generalities to a place where it's causing more problems than it needs to, where it's causing us to be fearful for no reason. Because there's no reason that a man should not be able to sit down, and I'm going to get so much heat for this. There's no reason that a man should not be able to go to a park and just simply enjoy kids playing, because there are so many reasons that he might do that that have nothing to do with creep, right? How many men have lost a child? Well, imagine that he just wants to sit down and watch children, and imagine that his child was among them, right? Imagine that he just likes the idea of watching kids play, because adults, we're kind of jaded. I mean, think about it. We're jaded badly, but kids are not. One of the most amusing things for me is when I take my son to the park. He's 5. When I take him to the park, he goes, and he doesn't need training on how to have diversity. He doesn't need any kind of training on how to be inclusive. He's pretty simple. He goes up and he says, "Hey, want to play with me?" That's it. Like, he scopes out who he thinks is going to want to play. Sometimes it's a boy, sometimes it's a girl. Sometimes it's a white kid, sometimes it's a black kid, sometimes it's an Asian kid, sometimes it's an Indian kid. It doesn't matter. All that he cares about is, are you roughly around my same size? I mean, he doesn't go up to the kids that are like twice his age, although sometimes, and he might discriminate a little bit against, the toddlers who he can totally recognize are not going to be able to run around and engage in the way that he's looking for, right? But he really limits it to just about that. That's about his limit. Like, is this kid going to be able to engage with me in some meaningful way? If it's a little baby that can barely walk, he probably moves on, right? He doesn't really ask because he's kind of got it figured out. But outside of that, he doesn't care. And I think it's so fun to watch because adults, we're jaded. We're not really fun anymore. We've taken all the fun out. And I think part of the conversation that we need to have we allowed ourselves to think too negatively about our own selves? And in this particular case, we're talking about males. And I made the point to my friend. I said, look, because I was kind of having a back and forth with a couple people who kind of took exception to this, and they thought I was jumping in on the bathroom debate and basically saying that if you're a trans woman, you're totally a threat. And I'm like, no, I don't think you are. And I know I personally know, is it two? I think two trans women personally that I've met in person, shook their hands, had conversations with them, know their name, know the state that they live in, can remember them, recall who they are. If I see a picture of them, like I know them, like we're not like super besties. Okay. But I do know them. One of them actually was in the conversation. And I don't look at either one of them as a threat. And I don't generally look at any other trans woman that I come across as a threat necessarily. Now, they could be in the same way that any man or woman could be a threat. And I try to remember that. I try to remember bears are always dangerous. People are not always dangerous. I have so many I have so many interactions with people all the time. Not dangerous. They're not carrying a gun ready to shoot me. I mean, they might be carrying a gun, but they're not out to shoot me. They're not out to get my kids. There are those people out there, but I try to keep this in perspective. The perspective is that whatever category a person falls in, chances are, unless it's a negative category, right? Like, I mean, if you say pedophiles, well, yeah, all pedophiles I'm going to say are potentially dangerous. But if we're talking about just a general category, trans woman, trans man, somebody who is born and remains identifying as a male or a female, an adult, a child, like these kind of very generic categories, most of the people are not threats. Most of them are not. Period. End of story. Now, that doesn't mean that I trust my child with all of them. I mean, like I don't, there's people who are not trans who I would not leave my kid alone with. And it has nothing to do with whether I think they're a threat. I just simply don't know them. But I think that we've allowed ourselves to get away, to indulge in fear. And we indulge in fear so much that it's making us even more jaded and more suspicious of each other. And I don't think we're actually identifying real threats. So we're not even helping each other. We're not helping our own selves identify real threats because we're simply just throwing labels on everyone as a threat. This is the conversation we need to have. Now, I want to point out something else. I've been seeing articles recently popping up more and more about female teachers sleeping with their students. And we're not talking about a college student who, is an adult and can make an adult decision. No. We're talking like some 20-something teacher who is sleeping with high school students. And there was recently a story that came out where one got caught making out with a middle schooler. Like, what? Now I want you to think about that. How many times have you seen a story come out like that? And a lot of people come and say, man, where was I? Where was that teacher when I was 15? Right? We view males and females differently. Now, there are differences. I will argue, I will die on the hill that we have innate differences. But I think that we need to start learning to recognize when there's a difference and when there should not be a difference, right? I can physically overpower most women that I know. Okay. Even though I'm a scrawny little guy, I can still overpower them. Why? Because there's a physical difference between me and women, most women. There are some. I mean, like who's the Ronda Rousey, those, yes, they will knock me for a loop. End of story. Right. They're like, I would be lucky to get even one good hit in. Okay. I would be very lucky. So yes, there are those women out there. And some of them are professional fighters like Ronda Rousey. And some of them, like one of my friends, they're just regular, average, everyday women that you probably ought not mess with. Okay. End of story. So, but there are differences. But that doesn't mean in recognizing the differences that we need to exaggerate those differences. Because I think what's happening is we're exaggerating them more negatively for males. If you think about it, because when when a female teacher is an abuser, people laugh it off. We would never laugh it off if it was a male teacher. If we heard about a male teacher who had been making out with a middle school girl, the pitchforks and the torches would be in hand before we finished reading the article. Like, that's the truth. And rightfully so. But it needs to also be the other way around. We need to be ready to toss that person to the wolves when it's a woman teacher and a male student. But instead, we have this weird view where males are either predators or whatever it is that gets lucky from the teacher, right? We have this really negative view. Well, guess what, folks? When we have that view of young men, young males, they grow old with those ideas. And so when people argue and say, well, it's no big deal because he's 15 and she was whatever, and he's just he's a lucky guy. Remember I did that podcast episode where I said female teachers rape too. I can't remember the number, but I did that just like barely 2 weeks ago, maybe it was like maybe 2.5 weeks. I did that episode and I talked about a different story where a teacher was abusing a student, right? Even though he consented, and I played the clip from SNL where they were making fun of this notion, and they had like this trial, and they had the boy, and he was up on stage, or up on the witness stand, and everything was kind of presented as if like this was a benefit to him, like he just really got lucky, and he was talking about how he got high-fived so much, and he was fist pumping so hard that his arm got sore, stuff like that. Like, this is the attitude that we have, is that young men are not victims. And so therefore they grow up with this attitude that I can't be a victim. But then we also turn around and we say, but you're also a predator. So we're telling socially, our society is telling men, you are either a predator or a sexual mongrel that's just ready to that's just ready, and you have the maturity to make those decisions early on. But then we tell our young women, nope, you don't. You're always going to be a victim, and you don't have that level of agency. So I argue that we need to stop looking at everybody as a pretend, all these. We need to put it in perspective. And the perspective is, our young men and young women can be victims equally by adults, because adults can be abusers by virtue of a power dynamic. Then we need to say, all right, look, you can be a victim, but that doesn't necessarily mean the other one is necessarily a predator. Men are not naturally predators. Women are also not naturally predators. Once we work out that base foundation, then we can have a proper conversation about where trans people fit in. Because the fact of the matter is, the trans community is a very small percentage of society. And they are going to effectively have to deal with whatever tropes exist already for the general population. And the tropes right now are that males are predators. but I don't think it's a correct trope. Now, they can be, and you might look and say, statistically, males tend to be predators more so than women, and that's fine. We can acknowledge those distinctions, but we need to keep that in perspective. We need to recognize that every teenage boy isn't out to impregnate our teenage daughter on prom night. And, if you raise your daughter correctly so that she gives the boy a good punch in the face, maybe you don't have to worry about it so much. Just throwing that out there. If I were a dad and I had a daughter, I mean, if I was a dad, how do you call it? If I had a daughter, let's put it that way. If I had a daughter, that's what I would teach her. I would teach her, like, look, if a boy touches you, you punch him in the face hard as you can. End of story. And I got your back. Right? Like that's how it works. Plain and simple. And you don't give them a second chance. You don't say, hey, you let them know, don't touch me. And if you do, you're getting a bloody nose at a minimum. Okay. And daddy going to back you up on that one. Right. And then I don't have to worry about it. Right. And I'll be teaching my son the same thing. Like, if somebody touches you in a way that you don't like, you bust their nose. Okay. Because to me, I'm not going to tell him that every one of his teachers is a potential threat. But I also don't want to tell him that he's a potential threat. I want to raise him to believe that he is a man that can operate in society and be seen as respectable because I have raised him to be respectable. And that's what I want people to start with. I want you to lead with the idea that you are looking at a respectable man, young boy, young man, male, what have you. You are looking at a respectable person until they have shown you otherwise. That's where we need to go. That's the conversation that we should have. You start with, you're respectable until you give me a reason to believe otherwise. And the reason should not be, oh, you're a trans woman? Well, you must be a threat. Oh, you're a man? You must be a threat. Right? But I believe the root is the same thing. We have this view of males that has gone wildly out of control, and we need to rein it in. And if we don't rein it in, well, we're going to continue this notion that people are threats and that we should be fearful of them, even though we shouldn't. There's no reason for it. There's no reason to be afraid of somebody until you have to be. That doesn't mean you don't be vigilant. That doesn't mean you don't keep your head on a swivel. There are threats out there and you don't know when you're going to encounter one. But I go about my daily life. I go out, I go to the store, I go to different events. I interface with a lot of people. And as I'm doing this, I can't even tell you the number of people that I've interacted with who at no time were a threat versus the people that I did come in contact with who might have been a threat. Because the number is so vastly different that it's a tiny, minute number of people that I've interfaced with who are actual threats. And they're out there. Don't get me wrong. But I can't live my life as if that person is every person that I meet for whatever reason that I'm making up. And I think that society right now, I think we need to have a come to Jesus moment about how we think of males, young men, and men in general. And so that is the point that I make when I post this particular picture, and I'll put it up on the screen again one more time. Here it is. So here's the screen. We don't trust men, so we choose the bear. So you understand why I don't want a man in the bathroom with my daughter. Both of these are coming from the same core. Men, males, if you will, are predators. And both sides are promoting this notion. Both sides need to stop. Because look where it's getting us. Nowhere good. End of story. All right. Well, that's my show today, folks. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you found it meaningful, a little bit of informative. I don't know if I would call it inspiring. That's normally what I like to say is like, I hope you found the episode informative and inspiring, but hopefully today you found it informative and meaningful. I want you to be sure to catch me Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Eastern, for informed discussion on politics and culture. Make sure that you are subscribed to my YouTube channel, or if you prefer where did it go here? No, that's not it. I lost it. Where are you here? There it is. Let me pull it up on the screen here. Let me start that over. Make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel, or if you prefer my Rumble channel, you can go to youtube.libertydad.com or rumble.libertydad.com. While you're there, let me know how I'm doing by leaving me a comment. Last but not least, I want you to remember, if you are a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. Catch you next time. But for now, I'm out.